Hello, my true crime junkies. Good morning. Welcome back to this week's new episode. And if you are new to my podcast, I would like to welcome you. I do hope you continue to listen. So make sure you subscribe here on this platform. And if you have any case you would like to bring attention to, you are welcome to message me on this platform. And I will get back to you shortly. Now, let's begin with today's episode. It is a cold case that I would like to bring some attention to. It has not been on media a lot, so I hope someone that's listening to this has more information. And they do come forward with a tip. I will be talking about Theresa Ann Bier. She also went with the nickname of Sam. She was born April 16 of 1971. To her parents, Shirley and David Bier. Theresa and her siblings did not grow up in the safest, loving home in Fresno, California. Reportedly, it was said that Shirley, her mom, was particularly abusive towards her children. When Theresa was about 3 years old, she was severely injured and ended up in the hospital. Shirley had wrapped Theresa's leg around the crib slats and twisted it until it broke. She also beat Theresa, breaking several ribs. At this point, social services stepped in and took Theresa and her sister away. This was also when her parents split up. Theresa was placed in foster care, and Miss Sylvia Pierce, a friend from church, took in Theresa and her sister Vicky. A few years after Theresa had been placed in care, her father stepped in, came back, and decided he wanted custody, as he had divorced Shirley and remarried to Margie Richmond. Margie had previously been married to Shirley's half-brother, John Richmond, and they had 2 daughters who lived with her and David. After getting granted custody, they moved to Southern California to work as a janitor, and where Maggie was also reportedly abusive towards her own daughters and Theresa. Allegedly, Margie would lock her refrigerator and just sit there and eat her lunch and not feed her own kids anything. Theresa would eventually return to Fresno to her great-grandmother's house. Soon after there, Theresa's uncle, John, aka Blind Johnny Richmond, was given custody. A 42-year-old man who claimed to have lost his eyesight while playing Russian roulette. Although some people believed he could still see a little. His daughters lived with his ex-wife, Margie, and David. But he also had 2 sons with a prostitute. Blind Johnny also had a 17-year-old girlfriend named Tamara Newman who lived with him. John would often make Theresa miss school in order to babysit his sons, and it was claimed that he and his friends would often sexually abuse Theresa. At 16 years old, Theresa was described as a slow learner, a little immature in school, so she definitely did not have an easy childhood. Now, in early June of 1987, Theresa told her friends, Peggy and Janice, that she was going to the mountains with a man she had recently met, and told them she was going to miss school for the trip. This man's name was a 43-year-old Russell Shelton Welch, known as Skip, a house painter who was obsessed with Bigfoot, also known as Sasquatch, and he had claimed to have seen it many times. Skip lived mostly off a disability check. He was addicted to meth, and his wife Shannon had died of drug overdose a few years back. On the morning of June 1st, 1987, Skip arrived at Blind Johnny's house as they knew each other, and he noticed that Theresa was getting ready for school and offered to drive her. This was a deception, as Theresa had already planned to spend the day in the mountains with Skip. Later that morning, Blind Johnny received a call from Central High School wanting to know why Theresa hadn't arrived at school that day. He told him Theresa was at home sick and spent the days afterwards searching for her. Speaking to various of their acquaintances, despite none of them knowing where she was, many of them did warn him that Skip was not a trustworthy man. That evening at around 9:30 p.m., Blind Johnny reported Theresa missing to the Fresno police. Now, before they headed to the mountains, Skip and Theresa made a stop at his daughter Chandra Welch's house. Skip was having trouble with his his beat up 1976 Chevrolet Monte Carlo. Skip and Theresa had made it to the Sierra Nevada mountains range near the Shadite Peak area. The Fresno police spoke to Skip's friends and family, one of them being the 17-year-old Michelle Ryan. She had been enticed to also go to the mountain by Skip during the previous summer. Skip's daughter, Chandra, had advised against her going. She knew that her father had habits of taking young girls to the mountains, using drugs, and then lure them into having sex with him. Michelle had a traumatic trip, but made it back home safely, as fortunately, she had gone with 2 male friends, although she believed she had been drugged. Chandra and her brother were also visited by the Fresno police and by Theresa's father on the day of her disappearance. Terry had also been visited by Skip and a young girl, presumably Theresa, on the same day, but Skip and Theresa could not be located. On June 5th of 1987, police officers spotted Skip's brown 1976 Chevrolet Monte Carlo by a trailer park near North Fork, a town in the foothills of the mountain. It will later be explained that Skip had come down the mountain to visit a friend. Her name is Dorothy Davis. She was very upset and told her about a young girl that had been taken by a satanic group and being kept in the Sierra. Davis said he was high and assumed he was just delusional. A few days later, after Theresa was reported missing, Blind Johnny received a threatening phone call from a young female. She told him that Skip was packing a pistol and wanted her to tell him, if you continue to make trouble for him, you will have more trouble for him. Even your kids can get hurt. And tell the police that Skip had taken Theresa to school, dropped her off, and some unknown blonde girl had picked up Theresa. End quote. So he basically called Theresa's uncle to give him a script to tell the police this fake story so they can back off and stop investigating. Now, 5 days later, authorities were able to find Skip at his mother's house in Sunnyside, Fresno. He was arrested for a previous drunk driving violation. During questioning, Skip spoke very seriously about Bigfoot and claimed that there was a very large number of them living in the mountains and underground caves, and that he had communicated with them several times. When questioned about Theresa, his story changed several times, and he insisted on calling her by the nickname that he gave her, Sam. At first, he claimed to have dropped her off at school, but soon admitted that two did in fact go to the mountains to seek Bigfoot out. Then Skip claimed that Sam had run off into the woods with another young woman, and then later claimed she had left with some other campers. In yet another version, he said that Sam, Theresa, had gotten overexcited after they had seen Bigfoot a couple of times that day, leading her to running off to find out the creatures again, to find them. And after that, he was unable to find her. Skip said that Theresa would not be returning because she's going to be happier with Bigfoot community in the mountains rather than her own home. At one point during the police interview, Skip, without the officer asking anything, said that if they happen to find Theresa, there will be no sign of sexual abuse. He claimed that although Theresa had been willing to have a sexual relationship with him, he would have never done that with a young girl, as that was not his nature. Skip agreed to show authorities where the campsite that him and Theresa allegedly stayed at. He led them to a small grove of trees at the meadow's edge along Browns Creek. At the inner area of this grove, there was a smoldering fire amongst the heavy layer of pine needles that appeared to be somewhat damped. This smoldering burnt area was approximately 3.5 feet wide by 8 feet long. There were these blankets that were put up, and they were in a certain formation. There was a camera, a purse, an off-white bra, and a t-shirt. Pictures of the countryside, along with pictures of Welch playing guitar as he was sitting by what appeared to be a blanket that was in the grove area. There were also pictures of Theresa. The campsite where all this was found turned out to be staged by Skip. From the topography in the photos, the local deputies were able to guess that the actual camp was about 20 miles away, possibly in Ghost Canyon. Even though he allegedly lied about the campsite, both the meadow and the canyon were searched. A helicopter that was searching for any clue or signs of Theresa whereabouts spotted something on the hillside above the Browns Creek camp. It turned out to be a blue shirt that belonged to Skip, and it had meth on it in his pocket. Searches by bloodhounds were done in the vicinity of the camp, and the dogs detected Theresa's scent at one point, but no other clues were found. Skip at that point was charged with child endangerment and child stealing. He was arraigned and released on his own recognizance by Judge Gallagher. However, this judge did not realize that Judge Austin had increased Skip's bail to $30,000 after reviewing the case. 2 days later, Skip was rearrested. 3 days before Skip's trial, authorities dropped the child stealing charge. They had offered to recommend a 1-year sentence if Skip signed a waiver allowing them to go forward with the murder charges if Theresa's bodies were located, but Skip refused. The prosecution decided to drop the case to avoid double jeopardy if they wanted to charge him with murder later on. It's sad to say, but Theresa Ann Bier, her body has never been found. Skip was charged with Theresa's abduction, but the case against him was dismissed due to lack of evidence in October of 1987. He was also offered a deal for an extremely light sentence if he were to confess and show the police where her body was, but he refused it, sticking to his Bigfoot story. Most people believe that Skip was guilty of killing Theresa and disposing of her body. However, there is a theory put forward by Skip's family that the speed freak killers abducted and killed her. So they're trying to put the blame on another serial killer. Despite Chandra, Skip's daughter, admitting that her father was a predator at the time of Theresa's disappearance, she still defended him after his arrest, claiming that his only crime was practicing poor judgment by taking a young girl to the Sierra. Blind Johnny, the uncle of Theresa, he died of cancer around 2008, and then later on, Skip also died in 1998 at the age of 54 due to severe coronary artery disease. Basically, he died of heart disease at the age of 54. Till he died, he refused to speak or admit that he did something to Theresa. So as of today's date, this case is still unsolved. No new leads have come up. So we're hoping that anyone that knows this family or knows about the story or knows someone that was involved can come forward and provide authorities a tip, and hopefully Theresa can have some justice and be able to rest in peace. So that is for today, my true crime junkies.